Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We got a really interesting report sent to us recently all about the global market for these things called angiography catheters. Probably not something you think about every day.
Probably not.
But these tiny tubes, they're actually super important in all sorts of medical procedures. Basically, doctors use them to get a clear look inside your blood vessels. And get this, the report's saying this market is set to hit like $1.6 billion by 2025.
Yeah, 1,624.5 million to be exact.
Wow, you got the numbers right there. 1,624.5 million 2025. But hold on, because it gets even crazier. By 2033, they're projecting it'll be almost 3.9 billion. That's a huge jump.
That's a compound annual growth rate of 44.5%, which is
Wow.
massive.
44.5%. That's like, I don't even know what to compare that to. Just massive growth. So that's what we're going to deep dive into today. The why, the where, the what's next. For everyone listening, if you've ever wondered what's happening in the world of medical tech, this is definitely one to pay attention to. So let's break it down. First things first, I think it's helpful to really understand what these angiography catheters are all about. Well, we mentioned they're these thin tubes, but what's the big deal? Why are they so important?
Well, think of them as like the eyes for doctors when they need to see inside your blood vessels. They're crucial for diagnosing and treating all sorts of conditions, especially anything related to your heart or your circulatory system.
Right, makes sense. And that $1.6 billion figure, the $3.9 billion by 2033, those numbers aren't just pulled out of thin air. They're based on some solid data.
Absolutely. The report uses 2024 as its base year and takes into account historical data all the way back to 2021.
So it's built on actual trends. And from what we're seeing, the biggest use for these catheters right now is in cardiology.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about how common cardiovascular diseases are, it's no surprise. Being able to see those blockages in your arteries, those narrowed vessels, it's crucial for both diagnosing and treating heart problems.
Totally. And speaking of let's zoom in on where this growth is happening around the world, because it's not the same story everywhere. Right now, North America is kind of the king of the hill. They've got over 40% of the global market share.
Yeah, I mean, in 2025, they're looking at a market size of about $649.8 million.
So the U.S. is naturally leading the charge there.
Oh, absolutely. They're projected to be at 512.69 million in 2025 alone.
But their growth rate, that CAGR we talked about, it's a bit lower compared to some other places, like around 9.7%.
Yes, still significant growth, but other regions are catching up fast. Canada and Mexico are also playing their part, both projected to be around 77.98 and 59.13 million respectively in 2025, with slightly higher growth rates too.
So what's driving this dominance in North America? Is it just that they love heart procedures?
Well, not quite. It's a combination of factors. There's the high prevalence of cardiovascular disease, of course, and a strong preference for minimally invasive procedures, which angiography definitely falls under. You've also got constant advancements in the technology itself, making them safer and more effective.
Right, so the tech's getting better all the time, and I guess their healthcare system is pretty well equipped to handle all this, right?
Exactly. They have a solid healthcare infrastructure, and their reimbursement policies generally favor these kinds of procedures. Plus, a lot of the big companies making these catheters are based in North America.
Makes sense. So it's like a perfect storm for this market to thrive there. Okay, let's hop across the pond to Europe. They're holding strong as the second largest market.
Yeah, they've got over 30% of the global revenue, with projected market size of $487.35 million in 2025, and a CAGR of about 10%. And when you break it down by country, it's pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, like who are the big players there?
Germany's leading the pack at 96.5 million in 2025, with a 10.2% growth rate. The UK is right behind them at 81.87 million, but their growth rate's a bit higher at 10.8%. Russia's also significant at 75.54 million, with a 9% CAGR. Then you've got France, Italy, Spain, even smaller countries like Luxembourg, Portugal, Greece. They're all seeing decent growth in this area.
Wow, so it's pretty widespread across Europe. What's driving that, do you think?
It's similar to North America in a lot of ways. You've got the aging population, the rise of cardiovascular diseases, and a growing preference for those minimally invasive procedures.
Right, that seems to be a global trend.
Definitely. But Europe also has a strong emphasis on early diagnosis, which naturally boosts the use of angiography. Plus, their healthcare infrastructure is pretty advanced, and there are government initiatives in place to improve access to these kinds of treatments.
So they're really invested in making sure people have the best options available. Now let's shift gears to a region that's really on the rise, Asia Pacific. Their growth is off the charts right now.
Absolutely. They're currently at about 23% of the global market share, with a projected size of 373.64 million in 2025. But their CAGR, it's a whopping 13.5%.
Wow, that's way higher than North America or Europe. What's fueling that kind of explosion?
Well, you've got a few things happening there. One, there's a significant rise in cardiovascular diseases across the region, linked to things like urbanization, lifestyle changes, and of course, aging populations.
Right, those are all factors we've seen elsewhere too.
Exactly. But in Asia Pacific, it's combined with a rapid increase in healthcare spending and major improvements to their medical infrastructure. So they're able to offer these advanced procedures to more people.
So they're catching up quickly in terms of capabilities.
Yes, and they're also embracing minimally invasive techniques, which is a good fit for their rapidly developing healthcare systems. Plus, there's a lot of government support for these healthcare initiatives.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach to improving healthcare access.
Exactly. And let's not forget the rise of medical tourism in some Asian countries. That also contributes to the growth.
Right, it's becoming a hub for medical care. Okay, let's move on to Latin America. They're a smaller market, but they're still seeing good growth.
Yeah, they're projected to be at about $81.23 million in 2025, with a CAGR of 10.9%.
So who are the key players in that region?
Brazil and Argentina are the big ones, followed by Colombia, Peru, and Chile. They're all showing promising growth in this sector.
And what's driving that growth? Similar factors to the other regions.
Similar, yes, but with some local nuances. The rising prevalence of cardiovascular disease is certainly a major factor, as is the increasing awareness of healthcare and the need for better treatments.
Right. People are becoming more health conscious.
Exactly. And their medical infrastructure is also improving, allowing for better access to these advanced procedures. Plus, technological advancements are making these procedures more appealing, both for patients and healthcare providers.
So they're on a positive trajectory. Finally, let's wrap up with the Middle East and Africa. They're currently the smallest market, but their growth rate's not too shabby.
Yeah, they're projected to be at about 32.49 million in 2025, with a CAGR of 11.2%.
Not bad at all. Who are the main players in this region?
The GCC countries are a big part of it, along with Egypt, South Africa, and Turkey.
So what's fueling their growth?
Well, like other regions, they're seeing an increase in cardiovascular diseases, often linked to those lifestyle changes in aging populations we talked about. But there's also a growing awareness of healthcare, and governments are taking steps to improve their healthcare infrastructure.
So they're making efforts to catch up.
Exactly. And the demand for minimally invasive procedures is on the rise there, too. They're also seeing more specialized healthcare centers popping up and more investment in medical devices.
So they're making strides in the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, looking at the global picture and the regional breakdowns. But now let's zoom in on how this market's actually segmented. The report breaks it down by procedure outlook, application outlook, and end user outlook.
Yeah, those are the key ways to understand the different facets of this market.
So starting with the procedure outlook, it looks like selective angiography catheters are the top dog right now.
Right. They're designed for very specific access, like if a doctor needs to reach a particular artery, they're super precise.
So it's like a precision tool for getting to those tricky spots.
Exactly. And that makes them ideal for procedures like coronary angiography, where they need to get a really clear picture of what's happening in your heart's arteries.
Makes sense. But then the report says non-selective angiography catheters are the fastest growing segment. Why is that?
Well, those are more for getting a broad view of your entire vascular system. They're great for those initial diagnostic procedures where they need to see the bigger picture.
So it's more of a wide-angle lens approach.
Yeah, and they're becoming more popular because they're less invasive and faster, which is a big plus when time is of the essence.
Especially for those emergency situations. Okay, let's move on to the application outlook. We already touched on how cardiology is the dominant segment, but what makes it so crucial for those heart procedures?
Angiography catheters are like the backbone of cardiology. They're essential for diagnosing and treating so many different heart conditions, from coronary artery disease to those congenital heart defects.
So they're pretty much irreplaceable in that field.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And with heart disease being such a major global health issue, the demand for these catheters in cardiology is just going to keep rising.
No surprise there. Now this one might be a bit less obvious. Oncology. Apparently angiography catheters are being used more and more in cancer treatment.
Yeah, this is a really interesting area. Interventional oncologists are using them to do things like tumor embolization.
Tumor embolization, that sounds intense.
It is, but it's a minimally invasive technique. Basically, they use the catheters to deliver agents that block the blood supply to tumors, effectively starving the cancer cells.
Wow, so it's like cutting off the fuel supply to the tumor.
Exactly. And this approach is gaining traction because it's precise, it has quicker recovery times, and it's really targeted.
So it's like a more strategic way of attacking the cancer. That's amazing. Okay, last but not least, the end user outlook. Hospitals are the big players here, no surprise there.
Yeah, they're the main hubs for comprehensive cardiovascular care. They have the technology, the specialized facilities, and the teams of experts needed for all these procedures.
So they're like the one-stop shop for heart care.
Pretty much. But the report says diagnostic and imaging centers are the fastest growing segment. What's driving that?
Yeah, is that like those standalone imaging places you see popping up everywhere?
Exactly. They're often equipped with really advanced technology and can offer those specialized services, like angiograms, in an outpatient setting.
So it's more convenient for patients.
Exactly. And as more people focus on preventative care and early detection, these centers are becoming more popular, which boosts the demand for angiography catheters.
It's like they're bringing those specialized services closer to the people. Okay, so we've got the lay of the land now, but what's actually pushing this market forward? The report highlights a few key drivers.
Right. There are some pretty powerful forces at play here.
Like what?
Well, first off, there are the advancements in the technology itself. We're seeing more precise navigation, clearer imaging, features that reduce the risk of complications.
So it's becoming safer and more effective all the time.
Exactly. And then there's the rising adoption of minimally invasive procedures, which we've already talked about.
Right. People are generally preferring those less invasive options.
Absolutely. And that's driving the demand for the catheters that make them possible. And of course, we can't forget about the aging population.
Right. That's a global trend that's definitely impacting healthcare.
As people live longer, the chances of developing cardiovascular diseases increase, which means a greater need for these procedures.
So it's like a supply and demand situation, unfortunately.
Pretty much.
Eh.
But even with all these positive drivers, there are some challenges holding the market back.
Oh, yeah. The report mentions some restraints, like the cost of these procedures. Right.
Yeah, that's a big one. Angiography catheters themselves can be expensive, and then you've got the cost of the procedure, the equipment, the specialists, the hospital stay. It all adds up.
It's not exactly pocket change.
Definitely not. And that can be a barrier for people without insurance or in countries with limited healthcare resources.
Right. Accessibility is a big issue. And then there's all the regulatory hurdles, right?
Oh, yeah. The medical device industry is super regulated, which is good for safety, but can make it tricky to get new technologies approved.
So it slows down the innovation process.
Yeah, it can. And that can drive up costs too, which isn't ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But despite all that, the market's still projected for massive growth.
Which is good news for the future of healthcare.
Absolutely. And speaking of the future, let's talk about some of the trends shaping this market. One big one is the increasing adoption of those advanced catheters with super detailed imaging capabilities.
Oh, yeah. Those were mentioned in the report. Like, what kind of advancements are we talking about?
Well, some of these catheters have sensors and imaging tech right in the tip, giving doctors a way clearer picture of what's going on inside your blood vessels. And then there's 3D visualization, which takes it to a whole other level.
So it's like they're giving doctors X-ray vision.
Pretty much. And this leads to more accurate diagnoses and more effective treatments.
Which is ultimately what it's all about. And then there's that ongoing trend towards minimally invasive procedures, which seems to be everywhere in healthcare these days.
Yeah, it's a game changer for patients. Quicker recovery times, smaller incisions, lower risk of complications. Who wouldn't want that?
Exactly. So this trend's only going to get stronger. Okay, final piece of the puzzle. The competitive landscape. Who are the big players in this market?
The report lists a bunch, like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott Laboratories, Johnson & Johnson, Cook Medical, Terumo Corporation, Stryker, Philips Healthcare, B. Braun, and Asahi Intech.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. And they're all heavily invested in R&D, trying to come up with the next big thing in angiography catheters.
So it's a pretty competitive field.
Super competitive. And then you've got smaller companies entering the market too, often focusing on those niche applications or more cost-effective solutions.
So it's good to see that mix of established players and newcomers.
Yeah, it keeps things interesting and drives innovation. And ultimately, that benefits patients the most.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a ton of ground today. This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of angiography catheters. To recap, we're looking at a market that's poised for phenomenal growth, driven by the rising need for cardiovascular care, advancements in technology, and that shift towards less invasive treatments.
And it's not just about numbers. It's about improving healthcare for people all around the world.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, here's something for everyone listening to ponder. What's next for this technology? What breakthroughs are just around the corner?
Could we see even more incredible imaging capabilities built into these tiny devices? Or maybe even entirely new applications beyond cardiology and oncology?
It's exciting to think about the possibilities, and that's what makes these deep dives so interesting. We get to explore the cutting edge of healthcare and imagine what the future holds.
And who knows, maybe some of our listeners will be the ones driving those future innovations.
Maybe so. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay curious.